So without further ado, let's begin with the online class session. And also to remind you, the number of participants are still quite lacking. It's like we only have 12 students right now in the Zoom session. So please notify your classmates to go to join into the classroom. But yeah, if you previously had class before, yeah, maybe you need some time to set up your laptop in somewhere, in some places in the uni or in any place wherever you are currently in. So yeah, just make yourself comfortable. Okay, so let's begin. So we will cover about well, not cover, but it's more like reviewing a fundamental part in software design. So previously in Programming Foundations courses, like in Programming Foundation 1 and 2, if you are students that are enrolled in this faculty since the beginning, you already learned about programming from prior courses. And I suppose in those prior courses, i.e. the Programming Foundations 1 and Programming Foundations 2, you should have at least heard or know about design principles and patterns. So yeah, let me ask you, do you know something about design principle or design pattern from your previous programming courses? You may respond via chat or just speak directly to the Zoom room. Have you ever heard about design principle or patterns or yeah, something like high cohesion, low coupling, things like that? Not yet. Okay, so Dylan and Rafael say not yet, sir, and no, yep. Okay, well, maybe not explained explicitly in the prior programming courses, but the spirits are there to teach you how to organize your code in a structured manner so that it will become easier to develop and maintain in the future. And in this course, in this platform-based development course, you will apply those techniques, those principles to make your Django's web application code to follow certain structure so that it follows the commonly used convention in the community, so that if there are other persons that will maintain or continue your code in developing a Django-based web application, they immediately know where to start without having to delve deeper to the documentation or be explained from the previous developers. And yeah, and later you will also learn about testing. And yeah, concerning about the design principle that I just mentioned before, this course will exercise you to apply the design principles such as threshold of concerns and also high cohesion, low coupling, and so on. Those are the main focus of this course. But later on, when you are going to take upper level programming course like the advanced programming course for those who are in the computer science program, you will learn more about the more advanced concepts like design patterns and also the non-functional attributes of a software in the next upper level programming course, like in the advanced programming course. But for now, you will only provided with exercises to learn and apply the design principles in this course. But yeah, once you learn about that in this course, it will be covered again in the upper level programming course. So if you want to perform better in the upper level programming course, make sure you understand the design principles in this course. Because usually when we learn about something, yeah, especially in higher education setting, the knowledge or the materials that we try to learn pretty often based on previous topics that we have to understand. So yeah, hopefully once you understand the material in this course, you will have easier time in the upper level programming courses. So yeah, so let's start with a question. Since I mentioned about separation of concern, design principles, and I believe I already mentioned this term as well in previous class sessions and also in the tutorial. What do you think about separation of concern? Why do we need it, and what are the benefits by following design principle, or specifically by following the separation of concern while developing application in general? So you can share your thoughts via this link, via menti.com. So you can type any word that come up to your mind and submit it. I will give you all 2 minutes to type anything you thought about the separation of concern, and then after the 2 minutes ends, we will try to discuss your thoughts about the separation of concern. So you can type like, why do we need separation of concern? Maybe isolate, maybe, yeah, that's one thing. And if you have more things to share, you can use the remaining input fields and then submit it. So yeah, I will wait until 10:14 a.m. Yeah, I'm already seeing some responses in the presenter view of that menti.com link. Okay, submit anything that come up to your mind. Don't worry if you think whatever that come up to your mind sounds crazy or sounds not relevant to the separation of concern. Just type anything actually. If it is relevant, then it's good. But if it isn't, yeah, we are here to discuss about it, to ensure that you actually understand about the separation of concern. Okay, good responses for now. Okay, 1 more minute. Okay, welcome. People who just joined to the room. I see right now the number of participants is 19. Cool. Okay, it's already 2 minutes, so I'm going to share the current results of your thoughts about separation of concern. So let's see. So based on the current results, it is interesting. So someone mentioned about modularity and isolate. Well, that's me. And also tidiness, to deduct, order endless, and so on. So let's cover some of these words first. So we have this thing, or to be more specific, in design principle, we have this software design principle called separation of concern. If we try to think of that word and try to understand its meaning without the context of software engineering, we can deduct like it should involve something like making sure that there is a mechanism or a way to compartmentalize of actors or procedures or any concepts that need to be isolated from each other. Let's see. So it will be revolving around making sure that if we have multiple elements, whether it could be a software package or even a piece of code that we write in the source code, we try to ensure that they can stand in their own way. And if they do need to interact with other components, we need to ensure that they have their own purpose and it doesn't interfere or overlap with the purpose of other elements. So, for example, in the real world, we can see this in government, where in some government, they employ like a separation between the head of state and the head of government. So let's pick an example like in the Great Britain, in the UK. They have a head of state. They function solely only for ceremonial purpose, just like acting as a head of state that will represent the country. But then there is the parliament, the British parliament, that function as the lawmakers, the one who makes decisions about the entire country, how to develop the entire country. And they function separately. That's one example in government. In software, pretty often we have to separate some functionality. For example, in your previous Python code, in your previous tutorial, you were told to create the web page in an HTML file, and then you also told to implement your business logic in views.py file. That's because we want to enforce a separation of concern with the business logic, i.e. the component or the element that will perform the computation, that will do some work based on given input from user, to the component that will display the result of that computation. So we want to separate that, so they can focus on their own job. So the views focus on the business logic layer that will perform the computation, and then the HTML pages alongside with the template syntax in the HTML page, they can use for provide layout, how to display the data given from the business logic layer. So that's one example of separation of concern in software. And let's see, to see other responses from you all, to organize, yeah, it is true. So by following separation of concern, we can organize the piece of codes that we write in when developing an application. Continue the example from business logic layer and view layer. If we want to create templates for how to display the data generated from the application, then we can define the template as the HTML pages. And then we organize them in its own separate folder inside the Django app directory, or if the template will be shared across multiple apps in a Django project, then we can also extract those pages into the templates folder that will be used for every Django app in the project. And by doing so, yeah, we can make developer to become easier whenever they want to trace or looking up for the problem when debugging the application. So if there is a problem with the looks of the web page, then the developer can pinpoint that the likely cause of the problem will be in the HTML pages instead of the business logic layer, the Python files that runs to produce the result of computation. Because the developer knows if there is a problem with the layout of the page, they can pinpoint it into the collection of HTML page. Contrast it with this example. So let's say let me open one example. Now in the template, not the template, but in the Django app, technically, technically, you can produce an HTML page from within the views.py. So, for example, okay, have another function in the views.py, and then we return HTTP response, and it contains the HTML page. We can write the HTML directly in the Python code. That's possible. Have, and then slash have, and then we have query, and then content. Well, you can return an HTML page as a string from within the views.py. You can do that. But then, if we remember about special of concern, this will make the developer's life a bit harder whenever they found a problem, because they have to, let's say, debug the HTML layout from within the Python code. And yeah, it's hard. I mean, right now, the Python's code in the business logic layer, that is the views.py, needs to perform two roles. First, they have to handle the business logic, and second, they also have to handle how to display the result in the browser. And since the component, I mean the piece of code now has multiple roles or responsibilities, whenever we have to make changes, then the changes happen in the file is twofold. So we have to ensure the business logic is correct, and then immediately we have to ensure the template is correct in the same file as well. So the number of changes that need to be made is greater than if we already separated them in separate files. So in this example, well, it is not really apparent right now, but when your application grows larger, and especially when you have to include other developer into your project, doing this kind of development is hard, especially when you have to use version control later on. So one person might have to edit this function, and then another developer needs to modify this another function that will produce the HTML page. And since those modifications happen in the same file, then it is possible that when it is being stored back into the version control system, it might produce a merge conflict because the edits happen in the same file. So if that happens, then there needs to be a synchronization between two developers. They have to meet each other and discuss how to resolve the conflict. Compare them if the edits happen in separate files. The business logic and the templates can be edited in parallel without having to introduce the risk of merge conflict whenever the changes needs to be integrated back into the main branch of the version control. So besides providing a proper organization of code, a special of concern will also help you as developer, especially when working in a team context, to ensure your work can evolve independently without disturbing other work being done by other developers. So it involves modularity, so it will provide the boundaries among the components in your web application. And it also make your code looks tidy. You know where to find the source code that you want to edit whenever you want to edit the lookalike of your page, or you want to update the business logic, you know where to find them. Okay, good job everyone. So let's back to the slide. So I mentioned this before in the previous tutorial. Django follows what it called as MTV architecture. So it stands for model, template, and view. And continuing the separation of concern before, these three pieces in the framework will have their own purpose or responsibility. The model is often called as the data access layer. So whenever you want to have data persistence functionality, i.e. Storing and retrieving data from a data source, such as database, then the codes that will be responsible for that purpose should be put into the models.py. Similarly, the template, serve as the presentation layer, whose job is to present your application. So if you have some data to display to the user, then you define the layout and also the aesthetics of the page that display the data in the template layer, in the presentation layer. So in the HTML file, you define how to display the data, whether the data will be displayed as a tabular data or as a list. You define them in the template. And lastly, the V stands for view. View is the business logic layer, the part that focuses on doing computation based on the given input from user or even from other application. So every input from the user submitted from the web browser or input from other application sent as data packet to the web application is handled by the business logic layer. And through this business logic layer, it communicates with the model, with the data access layer, in order to retrieve or store data if required. And if there is a requirement to display the data from the data layer, then the business logic layer is the one that processes those data and then generate the output as HTML page using the existing template in the presentation layer. So yeah, view can be viewed as the bridge between models and templates, and also as the business logic layer that handles the computation happening to deliver the functionalities of your application. So yeah, that's the general overview about MTV architecture. Any questions so far regarding the architecture? Yep. Okay. To give you a contrast, an example. Okay, I think I can display this. Please wait. I'm going to show you something. Okay. So this is a different example, but it highlights how, the use of architectural pattern in developing web application. So previously, what you see as MTV architecture is considered as what they call as design pattern. So the existing software development communities in the industry or hobbyists, they already developed some kind of recipe based on their experiences in developing certain type of applications. And in this course, since we are developing web application, we try to look at reference available in the community and also in the industry. And we look at them and see there is a common approach in developing a web application. So the common approach to develop a web application is is by following a pattern. A pattern here is like a recipe. So if following this recipe, then we can have a web application that has the quality attributes desired from following that recipe. So in this example, if we are following this MTV architecture, which it's similar to following the recipe to have a web application that has a clear separation of concern from the data access layer, presentation layer, and also the business logic layer. And by doing so, we can have quality attributes such as easier to maintain, allow a parallel development among the developers, and also to have a more structured organization of the code. But yeah, the pattern here is not immediately come up and designed by a single person. This is a pattern usually come out from effort from the community. So for the community of the web application developers, whether they are hobbyists or professional in the industry, they find that there is a way that commonly followed by other developer as well, and they try to make them into a recipe codes. And the recipe is the design pattern that is followed by other developers whenever they want to develop a web application. And this MTV architecture is one example of that design pattern. So by following this recipe, your web application will have these quality attributes later on if properly implemented. But there is one, although Django named the architecture as MTV, actually this MTV architecture has a more general name. And the more general name of MTV architecture is MVC, Model, View, and Controller. So we already have model. So the model in Django is equivalent to the model that is divided in MVC pattern. View also similar, but the difference here, no, not the view. The difference between MTV and MVC that more commonly known in the community is the TNV part. In MVC, the T here is the view actually. T in MVC. Because in MVC, M stands for model, V stands for view, but the view there is for the presentation. Now, the V in MTV, in Django's MTV, actually is the C, the controller. Yeah, it's just difference of naming. But yeah, since Django is a bit more specific, yeah, they have their own term to define MVC in their own framework. So yeah, if you see MVC pattern whenever you Googling for other web application development frameworks, what you need to know is MTV in Django is still similar with MVC that commonly found in other web application development framework. Basically, they are still similar. So yeah, that's a bit detour from MTV architecture to the more general MVC architectural pattern. And yeah, you will learn more about this design pattern later on in the upper level programming course, the advanced programming course. Usually I teach that course, so yeah, get prepared if you want to take that course later in your study plan. So yeah, I already explained this before in the tutorial session. So whenever your browser sends a request to your application, it goes through the internet, as you can view it like a data, a letter in an envelope. So to give you an illustration, let's say, let me illustrate it as a Python code. Okay, so you have a request. You can view requests as a letter or a mail. So when you create a request from your web browser, you are writing a letter or a mail. So when you send that request to the web application, the request will be put into an envelope in quotes. So what is the content of the envelope? Well, pretty much several things. For example, let me open this. Okay, let's say I'm going to visit DataTo again. Okay, open that tools. So when you send a request to a web application, you send that request as a data that will be put into an envelope in quotes. And that envelope contains several information like, let's see, this one. So if you are using developer tools in your web browser, you can inspect the request that sent to a web application. In this example, you can see the envelope contains headers, and the headers contain the several information such as the destination or the URL of your request, and then also the get the method of that request. This will be explained later in subsequent materials. And then there's also status code. This is the response obtained from the web application, whether the request successfully handled or not. So this is the envelope sent to the destination, which is the web application. And yeah, it contains, this is the more detailed information about the envelope. So in the envelope or the headers of your data, it contains other information as well, such as the type of transmission protocol being used, and also other information that is embedded into the envelope or into the headers by your web browser, such as the user agent or the identifier of the type of browser used to send the request. So that's the data being sent to the web application. So it will contain headers, and also the URL method. And in this course, you only need to know this. Later on, when you learn, when you take a computer network course, actually this can go deeper. So, computer networks, it's developing. So it's not finished by simply adding information by the web browser. Later on, the request eventually will be transferred via a transmission protocol, right? And there is much more thing happen deep down in the data transmission between two computers, and you will learn more about that in later course in computer networks. And okay, so back to this example. Once you have the request sent to the web server will try to understand is this request is valid and associated to an application in the web server. Previously in the first class session or second class session, I already forgot. I demonstrated that. Well, maybe I can do that again. So let me open a connection to the faculty server. Okay, and then coming back to the software quality assurance website. Okay, the log of the website. I can see the web server will try to identify whether these requests are valid or not. So in this example, I can see that there are multiple requests coming into the software quality assurance website from certain IP address, like this IP address 152.118.148.93. This request point to the this request try to get the PET 2021 exercise 4, and since it is a valid web page, the web server will return response code to 100 back to the web browser or any client that sent the request. And this handling of requests is dictated or defined in the web server. So it checks the envelope again. So it checks if the location match the following pattern. So if it matches /ADV proc, then the request will be redirected to the web application that serve the course set of advanced programming course. However, by default, if the request doesn't match anything, then it is assumed that it will be the request to the website of the software quality assurance website. So that is handled by the web server. Now back to the example. Django also has that kind of mechanism. So let me run the check here. Please page. I can manage the area sample. So if I access the localhost 127.0.0.1 port 8000, Django try to identify the envelope, the data envelope sent from the web browser, and it checks. Okay, it checks the URL. So it sees that it received the /URL, the root URL to the web application. And to handle that URL, Django will ask not ask, but rather will route the handling into the appropriate application. So remember that in a Django project, we can have more than one application, and we can view Django application as sort of foundation or the scaffolding that will be used to build our web applications. So right now, the Django contains the Django project contains the following applications. So it contains the default ones from Django's default project, and also it has the example application. So from the example, since the example application already defined in the list of apps in the Django's project, Django will use that list of application to determine which application is associated with the received request. So since the application is already there in the settings, the next things to see is the URLs, the urls.py. So in the urls.py, it defines the, you can view it like a dictionary. So we can have a list of URL patterns where each pattern is associated with the urls.py in the app residing in current Django application, in current Django project. For example, there is already an existing admin/URL pattern, and this points to the back office or the admin page of the Django web application. But then, since we already have an application, a new application called example, then we map the default root URL with the /URL to be handled by the urls.py in the example_app. So it's like we delegating the handling of requests that starts with / into the urls.py in the example_app. So then we move on to the example app, to the urls.py. And in the urls.py, it has these two URL patterns. So if the URL, the URL in the request doesn't contain anything, so the URL only contain a single / or not at all, because usually if your request URL doesn't contain anything, it is assumed that that request will points to the root path of your application, and in that case, it will be handled by this function, the index function here. So if there's a request sent to the application without anything after the root path, then it will be handled by the index function. However, if the request contains hello in the URL, yes, then this request will be handled by the hello function in the views.py. Then it will proceed executing the code defined in the function. Okay, that's the example that already been demonstrated in the tutorial. So whenever you send a request from the web browser, first it will go through to the urls.py in the project, and if there is a match between the request URL with a URL pattern in the defined in the project's urls.py, then the handling of that request will be delegated to that piece of code that match with the given request URL. Any questions so far regarding the URL handling mechanism in Django? No questions so far? Okay. Yeah, this already been covered in the tutorial. So yeah, create virtual environment first. And the motivation here is to isolate your dependencies or software packages used in each project that you own in your development environment. So for example, this environment, I have these dependencies or software packages used to demonstrate the Django web application template. However, in another project, well, right now it's still empty, but yes, yeah, it's currently empty, but I'm going to have some, well, not some, but totally different software packages used in this project. So to ensure those software packages are only used in my other project, then I can isolate them in a virtual environment. Similarly, in the slide, you can have multiple Django app project. Maybe you use an old version of Django application, and you also taking this course that using the more latest Django version. Then to ensure both Django will have consistent software packages that is used for that specific version, you can isolate them into two separate virtual environments. Yep. Yeah, I already covered this before. So initially, your Django project doesn't contain any application besides the admin application, and yeah, only admin application that is given by default from initial Django project. You can start a new one by using the start project command. So you can go back to the example. And let's see, me re-enable the data environment. So let's say you want to create another app that will handle, let's say, since the context is creating a to-do list or wish list, let's say you want to yeah, I don't know, maybe making a blog that describe your wish list or to-do list. Then you can use start, not start project. Yes. Start app. So you will have a new Django application in current Django project. But if you want to start a new project from scratch, then yeah, you can use the start project command when invoking Django-admin command. And yeah, so you can have multiple apps in a single Django project. And yeah, I already explained the analogy. So you can view Django project as the scaffolding or as the platform that will contain one or more Django applications. And each application may have their own functionality, or maybe even later on sharing their functionality to other applications. So yeah, let's continue with the example based on the template. In the slide, it asks you to use a run server to run your Django project as web application. And yeah, Django provided what is called as development server. So they provide you with the server that will receive the request from your web browser in this URL. So your web application right now is running locally in your own computer, and that can be accessed using this URL 127.0.0.1 at port 8000. So that's where your web application is running in your own computer. Well, you can configure the port later on. I think there is one parameter to determine the port name. Oh yeah, so if you type --help, this is my mistake. You actually can read the short documentation of each option in Django -py, in Django's -py script by adding --help parameter. And you will see the available options that you can use when running the development server. For example, if you want to run your Django application locally in different port, then you can do so by using this argument addr port. So you can for 5, for example, and your web application can be accessed through the port 12345 in your own computer. And yeah, there are also other options, but most likely you won't use that in this course. So yeah, you can just ignore them. But unless if you have a really specific use cases or necessity, then you might have to use these options. Like, for example, there is this option called no reload. Usually, the development server in a web application framework, not only in Django, but also in other frameworks, have this capability of auto-reloading any changes happen in the source code. So whenever you make changes into your source code, then the changes will automatically reflected in the current version that is being served using the development server. But if you want to avoid that, then you can specify the development server not to automatically reload any changes happen in the source code. And yeah, you already gone through this work before in the tutorial. So every time you created a new app in the Django project, don't forget to put it into the list of installed apps in the Django's project settings.py. And yeah, because Django needs to know the list of applications, and use that information to properly delegate the request handling to the correct application. So installed apps and URL.py are important to ensure your request can be delegated to the correct Django application. And yeah, in the tutorial, you already experienced this. So when you have /wishlist, then it will be handled by the function associated with the wishlist URL and so on. And to ensure that your app URLs are recognized by Django's project, you put it into the settings.py of your Django project. You put it into the install apps, okay? Also into the URL.py in the Django's project here. So yeah, as for the view, the view of the app, okay, since we are dealing with requests, eventually we need to provide a response, right? That's the fundamental aspects in web programming actually. So input from users are represented as requests, and then the output is represented as response. Here, I think I need to change the Visual Studio here, because I want to demonstrate something about code completion. Project. Okay, cool. One interesting note: if you are using Visual Studio Code with Python extension, so here I already installed Python extension. It will automatically detect your virtual environment and activate it in the terminal, so you don't have to type env scripts activate or source env bin activate in your terminal manually. It will be automatically detected and activated by Visual Studio Code. Okay, so we have requests as input, and eventually when we want to provide an output to the user, we have to put the output into a response object. Now, in Django, the response object is represented using this HTTP response class. So for those who have learned object-oriented programming language before, the response that will be sent to the user is represented as a class in Django, and that class is HTTP response. And in the class here, yeah, you can see in the constructor that it receives content, a byte string, and also followed by free-form arguments and keyword arguments. Basically, you can have other arguments, and usually the list of those valid arguments needs to be inspected in the documentation of Django. But at minimum, you can provide the string that will be sent to the web browser, to the user's web browser, by providing the string into this content argument when invoking the HTTP response constructor. But why in the example that you see are using render instead of HTTP response? Yeah, it's because render itself will produce a HTTP response. So render is a function that that specifically used to load an HTML file and put some data into that HTML file, so that when the HTML file is loaded with the data, it will be stored as a content, as a string that will be put into the HTTP response object that return back to the web browser. So yeah, this render function actually will produce an object of HTTP response. Now, if we look at the function, we can create our own HTTP response. So let's say we have response and we create it in this manner. This is a valid response and whatever if you want. However, when programming in Python, one of the common what you call it? Okay, so for those who have previous experience in programming using Java, pretty often that you can have auto-completion, right, in your editor or IDE. So whenever you type, say, F, then the editor will provide you with some recommendation. Do you want to invoke the filter function or define a float object? Or do you want to create a for loop? That's provided automatically by your IDE or text editor, and that's good. It enhances your productivity when writing codes. However, in the case of language like Python, it's a bit hard. Although the technology is already there, so in this example, Python already know that response is a type of HTTP response. So the Visual Studio Code can provide you with recommendation what kind of attributes or methods that you want to invoke. But how about request? Request doesn't have auto-completion available in the editor. Even if you try to use control space to create the pop-up of recommendation, the list will be not relevant. And that is due to the nature of Python as a dynamically typed language. So in Python, you don't have to specify the data type, right? While that provides convenience to programmers, but it actually make it harder to the code editor that we use to provide auto recommendation. So I really suggest you to try to do this. So every argument or variable that you use in your Python code, try to import the actual class or type associated with that variable or argument. Because in Python, we can do what is called as type hinting. So this becomes a bit similar to Java, right? So every argument, we can have an argument or variable that contains the declaration of its data type. That's actually possible in Python. But the benefit is we can have this auto recommendation. So we can know request has the following attributes and also functions. So we can see that request actually has this get dictionary and also cookies, which will be relevant in subsequent lecture materials when we have to deal about persisting user information. and other attribute as well, like headers. So we can use this headers data to actually inspect the HTTP headers sent from the web browser. And that is possible by using this type hinting, because your text editor, whether you are using PyCharm or Visual Studio Code, they use this type information to provide the recommendation in the text editor. So yeah, try to use type hinting if you want. But yeah, type hinting, while it will be helpful for you when developing code, but it will also make the code looks more terser, not terser, verbose, more verbose. And yeah, it depends on your reference when programming in Python. You can have a more verbose code that will assist you using auto-completion, but yeah, it will look more like a Java code instead of Python code, right? So yeah, if you prefer to type your code like in statically typed language such as Java, you can use type hinting. But if you try to make your code looks more shorter, like most code written in Python usually, and then you can avoid using type hinting to make your code look shorter. But yeah, in the cost of having no assistance from the IDE or text editor to generate the auto completion. So yeah, that's one thing interesting about Python. So you can use type hinting to assist you to generate auto completion of the code, or you can just forget about it and just type Python as you usually do as you have learned from previous programming courses. Okay, back to the slide. From the URLs, it will delegate the handling of that request to the appropriate function in the views. And from the views, it will load the template file and put the data inside the template file, which will be later returned as a HTTP response. And in order to put data into the template, well, as it implies by its name, template contains a variable here. So the variable is put inside a double curly brackets. That's how the template works in Django. So you can have a variable that will contain any data passed into the template from the views.py. So in this example, if the request is empty, then the visitor name here will contain any of the following string in this titles list. However, if there is a name in the request, then instead of choosing a random title from this list, the page will simply display the value of the name into the web page. So to demonstrate, so let's say I send a request /hello with a parameter name with value Ricky to the web application. And the request URL here is 127.0.0.1 port 8000 followed by /hello question mark name, which is the variable or the parameter of the request, and then the value of that parameter is Ricky. And that request is received in the Django application. And since it is a valid request, it will be handled by this section of code. Since there is a name variable in the request, then get the value of name, which is Ricky here, and put Ricky into the HTML page here. So you can visualize it like this. So for every visitor name, Django will replace that visitor name with Ricky. That's how you can view it or imagine it when Django is generating the HTML page. So the visitor name will be replaced by the argument Ricky. If the argument is empty, or the name doesn't contain anything, then it will contain a title, for example, anonymous. So that's what will happen when Django generating the HTML page that will be returned as response to the web browser. So yeah, now I want to ask you some questions. Let's say, try to look back into your previous tutorial and see that there are two HTML files in your code. There is a base HTML and wishlist.html. My question is, how do they work together? Can anyone respond through chat or via voice directly into the Zoom room? Because right now, let me give you one example. This is the Hello World page, right? That is provided in the template that you use to generate, to work on the tutorial. And this page is defined in the, where is it again? In the templates folder inside the example app folder. So you have this example HTML, several HTML pages in the templates folder, but also there is another templates folder in the root project directory. So you see here that there is a base.html. And for some reasons, we only define our content in the index.html within the app directory. So we define the actual content here. But then, how is the base HTML here is used to generate the final result of the HTML page? In your opinion, what actually happened in Django when Django generated the actual result of the HTML page? What happened is actually inside Django? Do you have some guesses or opinion about that? Or point out specifically which part of the template that combine this HTML with the wishlist HTML in the tutorial. Anyone? Any two? Okay. Yeah, and I think I'm going to let this as your own exercise. Try to figure out how actually this HTML and the wishlist HTML is merged together in when generating the final result of the HTML page displayed on in the web browser. Now, models. So models usually used to interface with a data source, so you can have codes that storing and also retrieving data to a data source. Pretty often the data source here is a database. While you will learn the database in separate course later on, but for now, there's few database like a spreadsheet maybe. So in a spreadsheet, like in a Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, you can have tables, right? Where each table may have their one or more attributes or columns. And for each row of data you put into the table, you put the appropriate value associated with the column or the attribute. For example, well, let me show you something. Okay. Well, I shouldn't show a spreadsheet of grades from my other course. So maybe I can show you this instead. Wait a minute. I'm opening a web browser in different monitor. Okay. Okay, maybe I can display this. Okay, so this is one example of data that can be stored in a spreadsheet, okay? And this data, right now it's stored in a spreadsheet, but to give you a mental map of the data stored in the database, first you can store your data in a spreadsheet. So for example, this data is stored in a spreadsheet named submissions, because the data here is about a list of papers that will be presented in a conference. So to contain all of the data related to the papers submitted to the conference, the information about the title of the paper, the authors, the timestamp, when the timestamp of the submission is stored into this table. And the data attributes here are the ID number and also the track, the type of presentation that will be associated with this paper, and the title of the paper itself, the authors, and etc. This data will be stored in the spreadsheet. And in your program, in your source code, you will represent this one row of data as a class. Well, not as a class, but as an object. So we will have an object that contain the same attributes similar to the one that we have in the spreadsheet, or rather in your programming, in your web, in this course, those data will be stored in the database that contains several tables or spreadsheet. You can feel it like that. So each row is associated with an object, and that object will contain several attributes like the author, the content, the date, when the post was created, and so on. Similarly, if the data is about paper presentation, then the object will contain the ID number, the title of the paper, the list of authors, the timestamp, and so on. So you can have a person class and you define it in this manner. It's basically similar to the one that you already created in the first tutorial. And each attribute needs to be associated with a certain data type. So char can be used to define a string with fixed length, and that field is used to represent time or date. And you can also have a link between two models by using foreign key. So for example, since post in this example will be written by a person, then the information about that person needs to be associated and needs to be defined in the post class as an attribute by using the foreign key attribute here. And yeah, these are the models here is used to represent the data of your application. But then Django actually also provide you with an admin application that you can use to create sample data manually into your application. So you can create an admin user and then use that admin user to insert a new data into your Django application. And the data will be stored into the database. Okay, and these model objects later on can be passed down into the template. So the object can be given into the template, and the template can refer directly to the attribute exists in the model object. So for example, if that person contain an attribute called display underscore name, then the value stored in that attribute will be displayed in the HTML page. And yeah, I think we don't really have much time because we only have 10 minutes remaining and I haven't covered everything in the slide. The load data, you already seen this in previous tutorial, so I believe you still remember what it does. It's related to setting up the initial data in your database. Now, test. Yeah, from your previous programming courses or your experience in programming, usually if you want to perform tests, what do you do usually? Can you share your experience in testing software? Or what do you do if you encounter a problem when developing a website or an application from your previous experience or from your previous programming courses? Maybe you are already quite a bit hungry because it's nearing lunchtime. Okay, 10 more minutes. Okay, usually what programmers do is if there is an issue, then you try to gain knowledge from within the scope of your function, right? So you try to print anything, at least to know what is the current state of your function when the error happened, right? So this is the most traditional approach in debugging, using log statements or print statements. And so you try to print the states of your variables or your programs from within the application itself. print it into the console or even display it to the HTML response. It's possible. But if we are currently testing the application, if we want to ensure the behavior of the application matches with the expected behavior that we expecting, we can also follow that kind of approach. So we open the application, and then since we expect that there should be a hello world text, and when we open the application and we also see that the hello world text is there, we can conclude that the application matches with our expected behavior, which is the page contains a hello world page. We can do that. However, when your application grows larger, we need to keep track what are the elements or what are the test cases, the expected behaviors that we expect from the application. We can track them actually by creating a spreadsheet, and we define the test cases, the scenario, how to test the application in a spreadsheet, and then we ask a tester to follow them and see whether the result matches with the expectation. But we can do better because we can have an automated test. So for example, here. In Django, we can have, they already provide a test case that can be implemented as a Python program. So for example, let's say that I want to test the business logic. So I create a new test case that inherit the test case class provided by Python. And since I want to test the function that will produce a response, I want to verify that if I test that hello function with an empty request, then the content of that response should have any of the randomly assigned titles. And then there is another test case that verifies if the request contains a variable name and the value is Alice, then if that request is passed into the hello function here, I want to check whether the hello function actually return a response with status code 200 that indicates the request is handled successfully, and it contains a portion of text that says Alice in the response. And this is done automatically by, well, not that it's automatically, the test case still need to be defined manually by the programmer, by ourselves, but the execution is automated by Django. And the execution is triggered by using Python method py test command. And in the test results, it found there are 3 test cases here. And the dots here indicate there are 3 test cases, and those 3 test cases run successfully. Let's say we deliberately make a mistake in the templates. So instead of rendering visitor name, maybe we mistype it into visitor names. Then we try to run the test case again. The test case know that there are unexpected results from the execution of the actual program's code, from the actual Django application. So instead of finding a result where the name is displayed properly, now the test case reported that in the first test case that will produce a randomly generated title, that there is no match in the response with the titles in the application. And second, the second test case also reported that the test case cannot find the Alice text in the generated response. So that means our implementation might be wrong, and turns out it is, because there is a typo in the templates variable. And if we fix that and run the test cases again, the test cases run successfully now. And yeah, it's already 11:40, so it's we already reached at the end of the class session. And you can try this at your own time by adding tests. But tests are important because especially coming from lecturer who teach software quality assurance course, well, you can certainly test your application manually, but it will get tedious if you already have so many test cases, especially if those test cases can be executed by tools, by using code. By doing so, you can improve your productivity. So instead of having to dedicate 1 hour or 2 hours to test your web application in the browser, you can develop a set of Python scripts to automatically test the expected behavior from your web application, and that will save your time. And since it's already written in code, the test can be executed automatically and repeatedly by assistance of, for example, continuous integration tools such as GitHub Actions. Okay, that ends the class session. The password to label your presence in the attendance module this week is NP600V. So yeah, that's the password, NP600V. Okay, any questions or remarks about today's session before I end the Zoom session? Not yet. Okay, so if there are no questions, or if you feel too shy to ask questions, yeah, you can contact me or the TH via Scale, email, or Discord. So yeah, we are available to respond to your questions. So I think that's all for today. Thank you everyone for attending the online class session. Don't forget to finish your programming assignment. So yep, thank you, and I will see you later in coming Thursday in the lab. So thank you everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
You.